Now that you know about scales and chords, let's take a moment to think about how these things intersect. Every scale has a set of chords associated with it. And when we talk about this, we're going to use the word diatonic. Diatonic means something that is sort of or related to scales, essentially. The opposite of diatonic is going to be chromatic. So if I talk about a diatonic scale, it means that a major or a minor scale, something like this. Something that uses some of the notes but leaves the other ones out. If I talk about something being chromatic, that means I'm using every single note on the piano. That's what we call a chromatic scale, all the notes. A diatonic scale is usually only 7 out of the 12 possible notes arranged in a certain pattern of whole steps and half steps. So a collection of chords that goes along with a given scale is often called a diatonic collection of chords, or the chords that are diatonic in, say, C major. Those happen to be the chords that you can make out of the scale tones. So you remember the C major scale is all of the white keys on the piano from C up to C. So if I start to make some triads here, I've got C, E, G is my C major triad. Then if I move each finger up one key, I go from a C major to a D minor triad. D, F, A. Again, use a note, skip a note, and go up sort of in a unit. E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, that's one reason we need to know about diminished chords, and then finally back to another C major chord. So you'll notice each note of the scale has a chord associated with it. There's a C chord, a D chord, an E chord, and so forth. And the pattern of whole and half steps is going to dictate what kind of chords we have there. So we've got some major chords on C, F, G. We've got some minor chords on D, E, A. And we have one diminished chord on B. The same thing happens in minor keys, except that we're going to have a slightly different distribution of chords. If you think about the first one now being C minor, I've got first a C minor chord, then I have a D diminished chord, because I have an A flat in there, then an E flat major, F minor. Without changing anything, I have a G minor chord, though this chord usually becomes major, which is a more advanced lesson. A flat major chord, B flat major chord, which also can be altered and come in different forms, back to C minor. So, again, each step of the scale gets a chord, but those chords will have a different kind of quality to them because of the different distribution of intervals. So, if you know something about chords and you talk with a musician long enough, you'll start to hear the chords referred to by number. When we talk about a set of diatonic chords that are associated with a scale or a key, it's really useful to give those chords numbers so you can talk about patterns that can recur in different keys. I don't just want to talk about C major goes to F major goes to G major, because in a different key I might want to use different chords to have that same kind of sound. Instead, I'm going to use this shorthand that lets me think about where a chord falls inside of a key. So I want to know, say, this tonic chord, the C major chord in the key of C, we're going to call a 1 chord. So if you're in F, you know, F is the 1 chord. If you're in D major, D is the 1 chord. So my 1 chord, and then you might be able to guess as I go up the scale, I'm going to count up in numbers and say C is the 1, here's the 2 chord, a D minor, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, back to 1, not 8. These numbers are a really useful shorthand for thinking about chord progressions or patterns and kind of understanding how a piece of music or a song goes together on sort of a medium level. We're concerned with things that are larger than just the notes here and larger than the ways that the melodies work. There are a lot of really common chord progressions. If I play a few of them, you'll probably recognize them. So for example, 1 to 5 to 1 is the simplest thing we can often play. Often going, here's the tonic, a 1 chord, here's a 5 chord, here's a 1 chord. And if I add a bass and move it around a little bit, it'll probably sound more familiar, something maybe like this. Now that progression is the core of a lot of Western music, although not all of it, but it's a really useful one to know. If we start to add chords, we can sort of decorate that basic progression. 1, 4, 5, 1 is one that you've probably heard in a lot of contexts. It goes C, F, G, C, or 1, 4, 5, 1. You'll notice in the right hand, I'm sort of playing the chords in a different order. That's something that you can do, but something we won't worry about in this video. You probably heard that progression in a lot of different pieces of music. For example, Grease. Kind of uses that progression as its core. You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling if you're a Top Gun fan. Hang On Sloopy if you're from Ohio like I am. The official state song of the state of Ohio is Hang On Sloopy. Based on this, 1, 4, 5, back to 4, just like that. So it's the foundation of a lot of rock songs, pop songs, things like that. We can add all kinds of different varieties here that tend to build on some of those same patterns. Some of these we just refer to by the chords that are involved. Some of them have sort of nicknames that can be useful for keeping them straight. So for example, this one's called the doo-wop progression. You'll hear exactly why, because it goes... That was C major, A minor, F, G, back to C. So we call it the doo-wop progression because you can imagine so perfectly something like that. Very common in 50s, 60s pop, though it also comes up in all kinds of other musical examples. You also have what we call the singer-songwriter progression, or sort of the axis progression, which is a long story and an inside musical joke. But those same chords in a slightly different order. Instead of 1, 6, 4, 5, we switch things around a little bit and we go 1, 5, 6 to 4. And this chord progression is also probably familiar to you. It sounds, with a bass, it sounds more like this. There are all kinds of songs that use this chord progression as well. So once you start to know a little bit about what common chord progressions are, you can start to identify a lot of similarities between songs. You can start to identify things that sound typical versus things that sound atypical. And you can really start to dig down into how pieces of music are structured, whether we're talking about a game soundtrack, a pop song, a symphony, and so forth. Thinking about chords and giving them these characteristic numbers is sort of the first way into understanding how the harmony of a composition is put together.